foundation this year, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project before I introduce our moderator to take you into the discussion and show you some of the things we've been working on with the project. First of all, I want to thank a number of people who made all of this happen. Our partners for this evening, the UIC's Great Cities Institute, the Department of African American Studies, and of course the prompt for this discussion is Natalie Moore's book that just came out in paperback. The Southside, a portrait of Chicago and American segregation. And I also want to thank Women and Children First Bookstore, that is Lynn at the back here, who at the end of the evening will be having a book signing and reception for Natalie's book. Thank you all. I also want to thank our staff who always works really, really hard for thank you for these events. And it's a very exciting evening because a lot of us are here tonight. You don't always see us in the same place, so I just want you all to show your faces and be visible because they work really hard behind the scenes and they don't really come out that much for the evening events. So Ross Jordan, our curatorial manager. Yay. Lauren Rhodes, our senior education manager. Kara, our collections assistant. Very important. Tara, our programming assistant. Where's she? Back in the back. You'll see her come in and out. Who have I missed? Maria, our newest member, Maria. Thank you. Yes, none of these programs could happen without them, and I'm really fortunate to have a dynamic team to back me up on all these events that we're doing. And if you are on our newsletter or our email list, you'll see that we're doing quite a few events. So why is Jane Addams Whole House Museum doing a project on the West Side, you might ask? Jane Addams Whole House Museum is a tribute to the social settlement and Jane Addams and the social reformers and some radicals who in 1889 moved to the Near West Side with the intention of creating social change at the neighborhood level. So they created this social settlement to work and live next to their immigrant neighbors at the time, mostly immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe, as a way to figure out how to create better lives for and with people. So they fought against labor exploitation. They fought for women's rights, immigrants' rights, for affordable housing, for every single social issue. And this building that we're actually in is one of two remaining buildings of what used to be a 13-building campus in this very site. So what happened to that is that in the early 60s, the University of Illinois Chicago demolished the settlement in construction of the university. And so we really felt like we wanted to revisit our own history of being a force in the neighborhood and reconnect with neighborhoods on Chicago's West Side, being on the Near West Side. And as early as 1890s, the social reformers at Hull House created a comprehensive study, the first of its kind on the Near West Side, which resulted in something called the Maps and Papers Project that documented the conditions of this neighborhood. It was actually commissioned from a federal study. And so starting at that point, we kind of grounded this project in that study and thinking about how we tell our own stories, document our own stories, and realizing that a lot of people have questions and are experiencing changes in their neighborhoods and wonder how their existing situations came to be. So making the West Side Community Conversations on Neighborhood Change puts neighborhood history in conversation with neighborhood change. And so we've brought together, this is our second year. Last year we brought together scholars, historians, activists, artists, all sorts of social service practitioners, people who are experts in their fields in the various sectors to come together to talk about neighborhood change in history and what's happening in their neighborhoods. We kicked it off with a public forum that a couple of our panelists were a part of, an all-day forum, and then we had 10 community conversations throughout the West Side neighborhoods with our cultural partners. And one of our cultural partners is here tonight, Emily Royce-Week. from the Chicago Cultural Alliance. All of our partners represent historic and contemporary neighborhoods. So we work with the National Museum of Mexican Art, National Public Housing Museum, Chicago Cultural Alliance, BBF Family Services in North Lawndale, the Douglas branch of the Public Library, Chicago Public Library, and the National Hellenic Museum. So all of the partners were conducting community conversations. We also did oral history workshops, and we have recorded everything as much as we could and gathered as much archival information as we could on the West Side, and are trying to also not only draw attention to the West Side history and change and issues, but also encourage new work and research and documentation on these histories so that we can all learn to tell our own stories. What else? Oh, we ended the last year with a week-long teacher institute and worked with educators around the city and how to teach this sort of history through this lens of neighborhood history and change with their students from various disciplines, and they created lesson plans on this history. So what we're doing now since that point is creating a website that we're almost finished with that collects all of these materials and also will highlight new materials as we go along throughout the year. So tonight I'm going to show you a little bit of that, so you're getting a special preview to what will become live, hopefully, in just a few weeks. I see my staff smiling at me, questioning that. So, all right. I forgot anything. So this is our branding right here. You can catch a glimpse of it. And thanks to Kara and Tara for putting all of these images together and working so hard on our website. This is our landing page where you'll get the general description of the project. You can also see an image in the background of the Maps and Papers project. That's one of the maps that was created in the 1890s on the near West Side, and mapping is going to be a big part of this project. Those are our four main sections. So, of course, about is about. News will tell you current events and upcoming events. Neighborhood section is a very special section, which I'll tell you more about, but in Kara's words, it will help us to share our own collections in the museum on this neighborhood history, but also share other people's collections, items that people are bringing to the fore from your different neighborhoods to sort of fill some of these gaps in the histories and maybe correct some distortions. And then engage is a section where we will be presenting new essays and blog posts and also lesson plans that you'll have access to on this material. So if you want to write a piece, let us know. And you've just met the staff, so you can talk to any of us. Okay, so this is our About page, and you can see we can recognize our partners, our funders, and then you'll also see there's a section where you can learn about our own Whole House's own story, West Side Story, we're calling it. This is our events page, so you can see the event that we're having today is featured, and you'll be able to get access to upcoming events, and then right underneath that are past events, which will look like this in archival pages. So don't feel badly if you've missed anything from last year, because you'll be able to see videos and all sorts of photographs and learn about the different kinds of conversations people are having about West Side history and neighborhood change. And this is our Engage section. As I said, it's going to be a combination of blog posts and essays from a number of scholars who are working in the field. People are writing about specific issues that they care about on the West Side, and this will also be the page where you can access lesson plans if you're an educator. And this is a very a special page, our neighborhood page. It's not a comprehensive database. Kara has specially created this page, or designed this page, to think about it more as a scrapbook. So each of these sections that you see here represent different collections, like Maxwell Street, or certain themes, like our ceramics collections in our own museum, but also, like I said, other items that have come to the surface. And you'll be able to comment on the section here and through social media, so it'll be very interactive. And we are also working on an interactive map of West Side neighborhoods that you'll be able to access through this page. Am I forgetting anything, Kara? Where is she? Okay. So thank you. So as soon as it becomes live, we'll let all of you know, especially if you've left your name and signed in our email, you'll have access to this, and you'll be able to access it on our site. We're very excited about this, and we're really excited to have a platform to be able to draw more attention to West Side neighborhoods, and not just for the sake of documenting them, but also, which is going to be a part of this discussion, for us to figure out ways together and across all of our different boundaries that we can actually make the kind of interventions that we want to make to create the neighborhoods that we want to have. I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of issues tonight that resonate with you, and we're really looking forward to a lively discussion. Okay, so introducing our moderator for the evening, Richard Steele, who we're really happy to have back. Like I said, brought us into our all-day public forum last spring on a panel about displacement and reinvestment in neighborhoods. Richard has been a presence in the Chicago broadcast market since 1970. He spent many years as a radio personality in some of Chicago's top urban music stations. He made the transition to talk radio at mid-career and spent the next 28 years at WBEZ, Chicago's NPR affiliate. During that time, Richard Steele became known for his probing interviews of newsmakers and pop culture icons. His most recent and well-received interview program was called The Barbershop Show, which I had the pleasure of visiting and participating in. This was a live broadcast done from a working barbershop, Carter's in North Lawndale on Chicago's West Side. So even though he's from the South Side, he has spent a lot of time working on the West Side. So we think he's the perfect moderator for the program. The Barbershop Show recently concluded a successful 5-year run. Richard Steele has also been a pledge host on WTTW PBS for the past 25 years. His commitment to the Chicago community remains strong, even in semi-retirement. Please join me in welcoming Richard Steele.
Hey, thanks a lot. One quick story about the west side of Chicago. When I was a shorty, I'm trying to remember back, we were somewhere on the south side. I was a real shorty, and my parents were trying to find a place to live. And as my mother tells me, they found a place on the west side, but because we were living on the south side, but they put up some earnest money and got taken. So they didn't get the money back, and they didn't get the place they were trying to get, which happened a lot during those days. I think it happened to them on the south side as well until we finally got this place in this basement apartment that we lived in for a number of years. But Chicago has an interesting history as it relates to where people live. That's just an amazing thing about the south side and west side. We'll talk about some of those things tonight, and about some misconceptions about each side of town, because there are many things on each side of town that apply to both sides of town, right, Natalie? No question about it. We're Southsiders for the most part of my life, but in the media, I spent a lot of time on all parts of town. When I was on the south side, going to get someplace to eat at a soul food restaurant, I went to the restaurant on 79th Street, Izola's. But over here, I went to Edna's, best biscuits in Chicago, right? How many people went to Izola's? Edna's, there you go. All right, we got some great people here tonight. I'm going to bring them up, and then they're going to tell you a little bit about who they are and what their position is as it relates to the topic tonight, which is West Side, South Side, Bridging the Divide. One of our panelists has laryngitis, so we're going to kind of figure out what she has to say through an interpreter, right? All right, so, but I will tell you a bit about Amara Enyia. She has a really interesting history and has a lot of accomplishments. She's a public policy consultant, writes extensively on issues of community and economic development, public policy, and systems thinking. She also serves as the executive director of the Austin Chamber of Commerce. She's worked as an education researcher, evaluator, and policy advocate, served as the executive director for the nonprofit Austin Coming Together, and worked as a policy director in the advanced manufacturing sector around large-scale development projects, workforce development, education, community-driven economic development. She received a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism. Oh, I'm trying to get my job. Political science and news editorial, a law degree in international law and development, a master's degree in education, and a PhD in education policy studies. It doesn't get much heavier than that. So please give her a round of applause. That's Amara Enyia. Amara, are you going to stay there, or are you going to join us up here? Going to stay there? Okay, you're going to stay there. All right, so also joining our panel is Valerie Leonard. Valerie, if you'll step up, and Valerie will tell you a little bit about herself in just a second. Valerie Leonard, a little round of applause for Valerie. She is a West Sider all her life. Next is Natalie Moore, who is a Southsider and who has the book that we talked about a minute ago, and somebody I used to work with at WBEZ. And she does pieces for the Chicago Sun-Times, and very accomplished. Natalie Moore. And last but not least, he does a lot of things. Some recent does a lot of photography, which is some great stuff, and the architectural area. He's covered a lot of things from a news standpoint and other news issues over the years, known by a lot of his readers, and somebody who we respect a lot, Lee Bay. Lee Bay. So why don't we, when we start, we're going to start this by, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have the people who are on our panel sort of give an overview of who they are, what they do, and what they bring to this discussion about bridging this divide. And as each of them conclude with their presentation, then we'll have some discussion among our panelists about the subject, and then we'll go to you out in our audience to have some comments or some questions. And I'm sure you'll have how many people out there are from the west side of Chicago? How many from the south side? Oh, about 50-50. Okay, we're good. Yeah, that should be good for some great dialogue. All right, so why don't we start with Valerie, who is a longtime West Sider, and you said you've been here all your life, right?
2 years.
Okay, that's a good thing.
That's all my life.
Yeah, okay. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and also the whole idea of the kinds of things you've been involved in, a lot of community development, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Should we use one of these microphones? Because I don't think she's picking up well. Oh, you're getting it? Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
That's better. Speak right up.
Okay, sure. My name is Valerie Leonard. I am from North Lawndale. I am a consultant to nonprofit organizations, and my primary focus is helping organizations with things like strategic planning, board development, and what we call capacity building, making sure that they can become more effective and be more impactful to their clients. My passion lies in working in North Lawndale as a resident. I've been involved in a number of different activities over the past 20-some odd years, and my main focus has been on community development issues and education issues, and more so where the two connect. I've been very active with TIF reform, making sure that I work with residents to make sure that the TIFs actually work for the people who are paying for them without being displaced. Other issues I worked on were the Olympics, looking at the pros and cons and the impact that the Olympics could have had in North Lawndale had they come. I have also been very actively engaged in school closures, because you know North Lawndale is ground zero, and I would say Southside is ground 0+1 for school closings. I had a chance to advocate for or against closures for every school in North Lawndale that was being closed. And I also worked with the coalition of organizations to develop alternative plans to closing, where we would have schools as our town center and then align our many social services to not only rent some of the space to generate additional income, but most importantly, to provide support for our children. Most recently, I've been involved in the first comprehensive planning process that North Lawndale has seen since 1958 that would actually impact the entire community known as Community Area 29. Been very, very passionate about that work. I'm no longer engaged with it, but one of the things that I think separates that work from any of the other processes prior to that, one, we have a combination of LISC, which is the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and CMAP, which is the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, coming together for the first time to do what we call traditional urban planning and quality of life planning. When I was there, my focus was on making sure also that we work to prepare the residents to be prepared for the changes. And when it comes to work on the South Side, I'm really, really impressed with what I see in Woodlawn. We have a number of initiatives. One, obviously the Obama Presidential Library is going to be built there, but there are a number of organizations that are putting together a comprehensive plan that engages residents as well as institutions, and they're very self-determined. And then there's another coalition that is working together to make sure that there's a community benefits agreement between the Obama Presidential Library and the community. Another community that I really like to observe on the South Side, the far South Side, ASE, the Alliance of the Southeast, they are working with a coalition of organizations, multicultural, from Hyde Park north to city limits south, the lakefront east to Chatham. And they are working on the U.S. Steele site. They're working to make sure that there's a legally binding community benefits agreement there. And what I like is the authentic engagement and the authentic self-determination. And really what's important is you actually have an alderman out there who is working with the community to make sure that there is a community benefits agreement. I'm sorry, is that, are you pulling my chain? Is that why you?
No, I wasn't, but I was getting ready to think about it.
All right, okay, yes, getting ready to think about it. So in closing, the most important things to me are making sure that when we do community development, there is authentic community engagement. One of the things that I would admonish folks in North Lawndale to do is make sure that, now that we have other folks on the outside looking in, coming in, thinking about investment opportunities, thinking about ways they can get engaged, make sure we don't lose that authentic resident voice. So, with that in mind, I think I'll be quiet now. There's plenty more to talk about.
Natalie Moore, Southside.
Good evening, everyone.
What, Southside got a cheering section? What's up with that?
It just occurred to me that I should have told Jennifer the food tonight should have been Uncle Remus and Harold's. South, because there's a little civil war in my house. I'm married to someone who's from South Shore, and Uncle Remus is the fried chicken shack on the west side, Harold's south side.
There's a Southside location now.
Yeah, it's on 47, and I can't believe my husband and daughter are turncoats. They like Uncle Remus better than Harold. So I really envision this sort of party where there's both, and then the party people decide what's the best. So I am obviously Team Harold.
Let me just interject this. I know you weren't there on the Friday that we did it, but on the show that I did at the barbershop, we had guests, we had people on from Uncle Remus Fried Chicken, the owner and his daughter who does the marketing. And one of the things they did was bring a lot of chicken for everybody in the barbershop. So you weren't there that day. Too bad.
I was not.
All right.
But seriously, so I obviously cover the South Side for WBEZ, but that doesn't mean that I don't ever make forays into the West Side. And I'm just thinking, how did I even meet Valerie? She does her work on the West Side, but I've been on her mailing list as long as I can remember and familiar with the work that she does. So, people have asked me, oh, am I going to write the West Side next? No, I'm not. For two reasons. I didn't grow up on the West Side, and what the Southside does is have a lot of personal stories, my own family stories growing up. So there's somebody on the West Side who can do that better than me. But also, I think it might be a little redundant. There are differences, of course, but as I do in the book and also in my own work, if I'm talking about mass incarceration or returning citizens to neighborhoods, I've got to talk about Austin as well as Inglewood. If I'm talking about food justice, I just can't talk about the West Side. The South Side not having grocery stores. That's on the West Side too. If I talk about segregation, violence, poverty, all those things. But there's also joy and Black life. We tend to only focus on these neighborhoods for their problems, which we should, so we can be a better city and have solutions. But and there's fun. I think we'll get deeper into some of maybe the roots of the class rivalry, but there's fun rivalry too, like the Blues, and Richard says the best steppers are from the West Side, not the South Side. Maybe Richard's not saying that publicly. I thought he said that on the call.
Got your thumbs up right there.
But the South Side has an older history as far as the Black population, the Black migration, but the housing histories are similar. Contract buying didn't just happen on the West Side, it happened on the South Side. Contract buying is when you're Black and you thought you owned your home, but you did not, and you're paying into this fund and somebody else owns the title. There's also white flight, and I think that we talk about white flight in this vacuum as if, we look at neighborhoods that turned from white to Black in a decade, and they probably actually turned sooner. That's just the census only comes out every 10 years.
Overnight.
Right. I have elders who told me, oh yeah, I saw white people wave to me in the morning and they were moving in the middle of the night, literally. But white flight wasn't just based on their own fears. There was a real estate industry that helped them and banks that helped them. And we can't talk about white flight in this vacuum because white people did not leave the West Side or the South Side to go be homesteaders on the open prairie. The federal government rolled out the red carpet and said, we're going to build highways. We're going to favor loans in these suburbs that we're going to say are white. The GI Bill, all these things. Our city and region look the way it looks because it's deliberate. This isn't just, I want to be around people like me, or, we have to stop thinking that self-selection and segregation are the same thing. And, a Chinatown can exist, a South Shore can exist, but Chinatown did not have to deal with the same racist housing policies. And so I'm not saying that, I don't think that Black institutions should be erased. I don't think Black communities should be erased, but we have to have a reckoning about how these neighborhoods were created and the history that was there, and that's the similarity between the South and the West Side. So some of the same challenges, and the other big challenge, of course, is violence. But we have to stop just looking at it through the lens of gun violence. We have to look at the economic violence that has really ruptured communities in both places.
Racially targeted disinvestment is something that we've talked about during this whole conversation about the West Side, and something that will come up a little bit later that applies to both sides of town. And the other thing, too, is I was having this discussion before we started tonight. I don't know if you've seen several newspaper stories recently, but contract buying is back big time. And there's some people that have been really jammed up by this, in that they make what they think is a purchase on contract, and they don't really own the house. And if they miss a payment, the people who own the house take it back, and you're out. One payment that you missed, and you're out. And that's what happened some years back here on the West Side. Something was created called the Contract Buyers League, which is something we talked about here. A gentleman by the name of Beryl Satter, and his daughter was here when we had a panel discussion the last time to talk about that. So there are a lot of situations that are similar, as it relates to people who are African American on both the South Side and the West Side, in terms of housing and the housing crisis, as often discussed about Austin and North Lawndale. As Natalie pointed out, Inglewood has a lot of issues, housing issues, and the banks are not loaning people money because their credit may not be that great, and so here comes contract buying again. This means that these investors buy up a bunch of dilapidated properties, and they say to you, we're going to give it to you for a very low selling price, and you have to do the fix-up. And that's great, except if you miss one payment, they take the property back because you don't own it, then they sell it to somebody else, and somebody else. And when they lose it, somebody else. And that's how it worked. And it's working again, unfortunately. So, Lee Bay, who has covered lots of things in his journalism career and has focused in the last few years on architecture and takes some incredible photographs and has been on, I see him on Channel 11 a lot. You do that? Mm-hmm. And a lot of other things. Lee?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to go very quickly through a few pictures. I mean, one thing about Chicago, obviously, right? America's first city of architecture, but when we think about architecture, we tend to think about downtown only. And I'm going to show you, and again, I'm going to leave out obviously a lot more than I leave in, that the South Side and the West Side have this incredible legacy of great architecture. That you find stuff there that Southsiders and Westsiders both know are there. I'm going to show a little bit of that, and then I'm going to end with something that actually made me a little mad, and hopefully it'll make you mad too, because what I'm going to end with fits the discussion we're having about what is being saved, what is being remembered, what is being built in the neighborhoods that we're talking about, and who has agency to push those things. So, I forget it. Sorry about that. You know I'm going to tear this thing up. All right. So, okay. So I'm going to. You good? I think I'm good. Am I good? So I'm going to begin with. I was going to begin with the first picture. How do I advance this? I'm sorry. Check.
It's called tech support.
See, it wasn't me. It wasn't just me.
There you go.
All right, we're going to begin on the west side, one of my favorite buildings. This is the former Allstate headquarters on Arlington. It's in that Holman district, the old Steele's headquarters, Holman district. This picture was taken a few years ago. There was a plan to turn it into housing. I'm going to depend on Valerie to tell me what's happening later. But here is a great example of art and architecture. One of the few, relatively few, in the city that still exist. And it's just a fine structure that's just sitting there waiting for it to be something to be done with it. Interesting ramp that goes to a former parking lot. This is on the left, the building along with the former catalog house. One good thing about that is that this place is now being converted, has now been converted to housing. So it's the Great Adaptive Reuse Project. Mercy Lakefront has it. Have 181, I think they opened last month, I think. 181 units of housing plus social services in here as well. So it shows that these buildings can be reborn if there's time, patience, capital, and clout to make it happen. Very quickly, just I think one of the most unsung places in the city is the retail strip at Madison and Pulaski. I think the architecture there is fantastic. I think you have an intact retail strip that's there. We can debate over the stores that are there, but there's commerce on that street that serves a need, and architecture on that street that is not landmarked. It probably certainly should be. Here's a bit of a window detail. Look at that. I mean, where do you find that in the city outside of downtown? Absolutely beautiful. Jump to the south side real quick. This is the Yale Apartments at 65th and Yale. This place was a wreck when I was architecture critic for the Sun Times. I remember me and the alderman and developer walking on the roof, and we were doing this, and the roof was spongy. Probably wasn't the best thing to do. I was heavier then, too. So I ended up on the third floor the hard way, right? Now turn to senior housing. Beautiful building. Go inside if you get a chance to, because it's one of the few buildings in the city that have an indoor residential building of this vintage that has an indoor atrium. So the apartments wrap around this beautiful skylit space. Worth checking out. Jump to the west side real quick. You know, one of the great legacies is Douglas Boulevard, where you have these great line of old synagogues that are now Baptist and other churches. Great monumental architecture that faces the boulevard. Here's one example. This poor baby, Valerie knows this one. This was demolished, sadly, about 5 or 6 years ago. Had been empty for years, and is a vacant lot to this day, and probably will be. Which again makes the call clear that we have to be careful about what we demolished and what we saved, and have to have a voice in it. And of course, the former Sears Tower, which is being reused there at Holman Square. Just a few examples of good new architecture. This is the new Christ the King school at Leamington and Jackson, is it? By architect John Ronan. Really good piece of architecture. Very quickly, this is back on the south side. This is the Lakeside Center McCormick Place, which may be in danger of being demolished. I want to show you something really interesting. Here's a church that used to be at 52nd near Union. Had been vacant. A Catholic church had been vacant for 20 years. And what happened is that it's still in great condition. But one day, about 3 or 4 years ago, Archdiocese demolishes it, but they don't really tear it down. They take the facade off and they send it to Lake County, where it was. Here's the construction site where it's going to go, where they wrap this church around the new church in near Antioch. So it's that kind of thing that can happen. Now I'm going to end with the thing that makes me mad. This is Malcolm X College, the former Malcolm X College, on the west side. Inside, here's the interior. Here are the doors by Eugene Edar. You see the one on display at the Cultural Center now. I got a chance to get inside and photograph it. Another detail of the door. Along with it were these fantastic murals, which really spoke to African experience. They came up with the school, part of the way to center the curriculum, help center the curriculum to certain awareness, a certain Afrocentric awareness. Sadly, the doors are saved, but the school and these murals, this is what happened to them.
No.
Demolished.
Ow.
And what goes on in its place? Black Hawks training ice.
Ow.
So just I hate to
Yeah, that makes me mad.
But these are the things. This was happening.
Wow.
And let me just get through this.
It's in a new.
So this is happening in some of these neighborhoods. That yes, there is change, and yes, these things are happening. But again, who's in control of change? Briefly, all the West Side, the entirety of the West Side has 15 landmarks, which sounds like a lot. So you think that the Douglas community on the South Side has 24. Lincoln Park itself has 28. So how the city remembers who was here and the histories that are remembered is the people who were here before the black people came, right? So what a city chooses to remember and what a city chooses to save says a lot about what it thinks about its people. So that's why, in conclusion, this conversation is really important because I think these dialogues like this can spark change. You can hear me, I guess, sufficiently. Okay. Well, I hope you can hear me. Let me share something with you. I was going through some old newspaper stuff just to show you how, and this was from 1993. Natalie, this was a story in the Tribune written by Cheryl Thompson.
But in this story, the title of the story is Southsiders, Westsiders Back Their Neighborhoods. And this is about perceptions. This is just from several paragraphs. Gone is the famous Alabama Pit restaurant here on the west side, which used to attract blacks and whites from throughout Chicago in the 1940s, and Martin's Corner, a popular nightclub on Lake Street. I heard about that, and Lake and Damon Avenue, where African Americans used to come from miles around to listen to music. For years, black Southsiders have stereotyped their black counterparts on the west side and vice versa. Although neither side seems to know how the perception evolved, residents from both sides of the city with more than 1 million African Americans agree that certain stigmas exist. We're certainly not going to solve all of that tonight in terms of what we talk about, but I just wanted to point that out. They were talking, this was a discussion that has been going on for a very long time. Some of the things that we do want to talk about, though, is part of how this discussion in terms of the things that are similar need to be addressed. One of the things that we talked about a lot in terms of community involvement, and Amara, I know one of your things is community investment, disinvestment, and the things that are surrounding that. And that happens on both the south side and the west side. It's not an unusual thing. The question is, what kind of community involvement is needed to address those problems no matter what part of town you live in? And I don't know, maybe the panel can address whether the politics of that are different on the south side than on the west side. So, Natalie, any thoughts on that? Politics and the politics involved with that in terms of disinvestment, in terms of even when there's a question about when they decide to put a given chain store in a neighborhood and determining what neighborhood that should be. Now on the south side, there's a lot of that happening right now, where some of the larger supermarket type stores are going into places like in Inglewood, and part of the idea there, they say, is to rejuvenate the neighborhood, to bring the neighborhood back. Everybody's not buying that.
Well, I can't wait for Harold Lucas to really get the mic, because that's who's in the back talking.
I thought so.
And we'll do that
I
when
know
we
that
do after
voice
we do
anywhere.
this, okay? Just hold your horses.
I think it's an easy answer, but it's also a hard answer. I've been thinking a lot about our elected officials lately and aldermen and what they can or cannot do. I think I've been thinking about it also in the context of, like, I've had friends from New York come here and they visit, someone who opens a business, and they say, how did this happen? And I'll go, the alderman. And they were just like, what is this aldermanic thing? Like, you just can't do anything without the aldermanic approval. And that is true. Now, I do know on one hand, it's, we're talking about getting capital, getting a bank to maybe give a loan to a small business, also convincing, this national chain or whatever that your constituents are worthy. Because it is a race issue. It's not an economic issue. I don't think that we can be fooled by that. Otherwise, I think Bronzeville would have seen some changes faster with getting, I don't think it would have taken, grocery stores in black neighborhoods become a press conference because they're rare. And I say that it's race because Olympia Fields, which is a black suburb that has a median income higher than the region, the city planner said, yeah, we can't get like a sit-down restaurant here. And they can't look at our numbers and say that it's economic. So there is retail redlining, and this is a new area of study, and some of the folks, I've talked to at UIC about this. So, and I think people look at density the wrong way, too, perhaps. This city as a whole has lost population. And we're not at our peak of, mid 20th century. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Right. There's still, I did a story once about all the retail leakage that comes from the South Side. And an expert said, a store may be looking at the numbers of Winnetka to say, oh, look out the high median income. But there's a lot of wealth in low income, working class, and middle class neighborhoods. Money changes hands. Like, you still have to do things, and there are more households in those neighborhoods than there are in a Winnetka. And so on one hand, it's like, how do we, our elected officials, are the people who can bring this development in, are they selling the neighborhoods correctly?
Or out.
Right. And, I just think that it can't, I think I'm personally over, like, density, like who are all these people that are going to come back to these neighborhoods? So let's, on the south and west sides, this is vacant land. In the suburbs, it's open space. So just even reframing how we talk about our communities and talk about them in terms of assets. And quickly, this is like my favorite anecdote to illustrate this. There's a bakery on 47th Street, Abundance Bakery. And I did a story, a black-owned bakery. He's been there since around 1990, so Robert Taylor was still there, and the Rosenwald, which just reopened, but was closed, a large multi-unit apartment building. So I moved to Bronzeville. You have a lot of buppies like me who moved in, professional blacks who, are waiting for this artisan cheese shop to come. That's not going to happen. And so I actually made a point, I knew what I bought into. I'm not going to shun the stores that are already there. And if you look closer, there is economic, just like you were saying at Madison and Pulaski. There is economic development in these neighborhoods. It just may not be what a certain class of people wants. But I did a taxonomy of 47th Street and found, like, the number one business was clothing stores. And these are not, like, cheap, janky little stores. Like, they're selling True Religion jeans. So anyway, this Abundance Bakery, the owner told me that he had better business when Rosenwald and Robert Taylor were open.
Wow.
And so doesn't that fly in the face of conventional retail wisdom? Well, why? I mean, this is not a yuppie cupcake shop. Like, they're not selling $5 slices of cake. Moms want birthday cakes for their kids, a donut and a coffee. Like, these are still, goods and services that people who are low income can afford and should deserve. I don't believe in saying, oh, well, you should only be buying fruits and vegetables or, things for your household. Like, people, like, this is commerce and this is part of the community. So I guess, in short, for the West Side and the South Side, there need to be better people at the table. I mean, people like Valerie can do that, but she's limited in her power. And that's not a slight on her, but she's not in city. Like how to get the people to change the narrative about what our communities are.
So how does that work in terms of like Home and Square, in terms of redevelopment?
Okay. Well, Home and Square, I think, is a good example and a bad example. Home and Square, they have the political clout. That is not a project that was driven from grassroots up. And in terms of politics, it was really interesting that you talked about it. I have been following Rahm Emanuel and all of his plans for distressed communities, and I stopped counting, from the time that he started running for his first term until I think I got frustrated about 2 years into his term. He must have unfurled about 6 different revitalization plans for distressed communities, none of which impacted North Lawndale. He had a health plan, he had an arts and cultural plan, he had an economic development plan, and none of this stuff impacted us. And then when I look at our elected officials they don't have the clout, the organization, the money, or the self-determination, or experience in some cases to actually demand what is due us. For example, we've got, a new development. Clarius Partners is coming to Roosevelt and Costner. We've been disappointed a lot of times over the years for development on that site. At one point they were going to do a big movie studio. Another point they were going to do a large grocery store. We finally got an opportunity where Clarius Partners is going to be investing, and they're going to develop and this is all on spec. They're going to develop space for a factory, or industrial space, much of which could be, we don't really know what it's going to be used for operations like an Amazon or so. And I guess in return for their $43 million investment, they're going to get a potential write-off in taxes, property taxes, for $30 million. And our alderman doesn't want to do a community benefits agreement. He is so starved for, well, that may be true, but you know, he's so starved for development and wants to have an early win that he's not fighting as hard as he could for the community. And you contrast that to what you see with Alderman Garza in the 10th Ward, you know, where they're going to be doing a $4 billion redevelopment of U.S. Steel. She's right there with the coalition of organizations that go from Hyde Park all the way to city limits south, and they're making demands of the developer who is actually working with them. And they're actually going to develop something from the community where they actually have, they're going to be doing housing manufacturing that's going to hire folks in the community. So compare and contrast the vision, the political will, the organization in that community with the 24th Ward. And I'm disappointed, and this is nothing new for us. This is typical. So we don't have the political will, we don't have the organization. And I'm not saying that I don't love the community. The truth is the truth. You know, we need to be more self-determined.
So what happens when, Lee, if you have any thoughts on this, or any of you guys have a thought on this, when these organizations come in and they do put a store in like a Whole Foods or downsized Walmarts on 47th near Cottage, I mean, it's just, these stores are nowhere near, especially the Walmart.
Right.
If you shop at Walmart, it's the ghetto Walmart.
Mhm.
I mean, so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, it's a complicated thing. It's a complicated thing. I mean, one of the things, and we got to look at this in layers as quickly as I can, is that one of the things that's clear, and I can say this now that I do what I want to do for a living, is that it's startling how badly the wards are represented politically in this town. The black wards on the south and west side, startlingly bad. You look at a person like a Brendan Riley in the downtown wards, and compared to what he does, I'm not saying I agree with everything he does, but clearly you have a person who at least appears to be an advocate for his constituents first. Now he can be that, he can do that because he's got a ward, a lot of stuff coming in, everybody wants to be in. But the learning curve when it comes to urban planning, when it comes to how to put deals together, it's surprising. And as a result, so what happens? It's like the whole card game. If you can't tell at the table who's the sucker, then the sucker is you, right? So that's the thing. So that's one thing. Secondly, is that we still run this city like a small town. And I know I was born here. I love it here. You guys know who I worked for years. But we still run this city like a small town, which means that everything goes to the 5th floor or goes nowhere at all. An alderman who's connected better with the 5th floor might get spoils more than one who isn't. So those are the problems. I want to push back a little bit on the density issue, a little bit respectfully to my good friend, which is that here's what I want you to do for your homework assignment tonight. I want you to go to a website called historicareals.com, right? Type in an address, any address in the south and west side. You'll have this kind of thing where you go there where you can pick what year you want to see the aerial. Just pick 1950, whatever. Pick whatever year in the past and pick whatever year current that map gives you, and just wipe the thing back and forth. And you will see density vanish from the south side and the west side. And, you know, the west side narrative is, you know, they burned it down after King died. You'd be surprised how much density has vanished from the west side since 1980, right? So the roads get wider. All of a sudden, blocks are demolished, and there's 2 towers that rise up. So density is important to be able to get. We go to a Lakeview, we go to a Milwaukee and North Avenue, and we see the fine grain of stores that are there. There's dry cleaners, there's specialty donut shops, there's this, there's that. That comes when you have a certain density that can support all that stuff. When you look back in time, as that map will help you do, and you look at a Bronzeville or parts of the west side, when the density was there, you had cab companies, You had bakeries. You had grocery stores. Now, it was shaped by racism. Black folks couldn't go here to buy something, so it was in their community, but there was a density to support it. So, but your question is a good one. You know, as these neighborhoods empty out, 200,000 people left the Southside this century. Those are white flight numbers, right, from the 60s just about. The difference is that the city did something to stop white flight. It is not doing anything to stop black flight, and that doubles back on the beginning of my statement about how badly politically we're represented in these neighborhoods, and that someone needs to pull the mayor's coattail a little more and a little harder about bringing development to this area. We live in Pullman, right, and it gets some attention. Roseland, which is right across the street, right across the track, almost gets no attention. Someone needs to tell them this is over there. The West Side, as we've talked about, has no political representation, has no representation on almost any board. Planning board, landmarks, all of that stuff.
So, by the way, let me just say this.
That's the problem.
I live in the 7th Ward. We have an alderman who's relatively new. He ran the last time and won. And he's not connected to anything. So when I have a conversation with him about things that are taking, I live in the 7th Ward where we had that shooting where 5 people got killed about 3 blocks from where I live at that fast food place around the corner. But what he said to me was, you can't even imagine how difficult it is when you come to city council like he does, and you don't have any connections. You don't know. He said because he watched how people get things done as opposed, connected to who they are.
Then you don't take the job,
and you know,
right? If you know there's I'm not talking about him in particular. I'm talking in general. If you know it takes a bat and a brick to win the fight, don't come to the fight without a bat and a brick. I mean, and that's
well. I mean, but in our system, the way the system works, I mean, how do you? If you don't have a big community organization behind you, or you're not part of the political organization, but you're somebody who just want to make a change and you decide to run, you don't have, as you point out, you come to the gunfight with a knife, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know, when I'm having this discussion with him, he's frustrated, but he understands. He says, when we always hear about the story when it snows, like in certain wards, the snow is cleaned up right away, and in our ward, you might wait 2 days for the snow to be removed, So at Burke's ward, snow is cleared immediately. So he was saying how frustrating that is if you happen to be in that situation politically. What do you do? I don't know what the solution to that is, but politically, because what we have in Chicago is we're supposed to be strong council, weak mayor, but it isn't. It's strong mayor, weak council, and so we end up with what we have now. So, well, let me ask you this question though. Part of this discussion, I think, has to do with those of us who have been part of the press. What's our responsibility, what has been lacking, or what has contributed to part of the problem?
Come on, y'all. Come on, y'all. There's going to be a Q&A after this. We can get all that.
Can we do this when we'll do this in a minute. Just hold on. So
I'll just say quickly that segregation manifests itself in many ways. We're talking about economic development, but if we're talking about people the uniqueness of Chicago is that we are diverse. Like, this is not, we're about a third Black, white, and Latino. So there are opportunities there are opportunities in this city. However, I'm talking about to be around one another and to experience all the joys of a city, no matter. Lee and Valerie got to this point too. Chicago's strength and its weakness is its vastness. So if you live in Portage Park, you may say, I have no reason to visit Pullman. You may further not have any reason. Let's get out the geographic part. But if your introduction to Black people in this city is through the news, then you're really going to say, I'm not going to Pullman. If you look in newsrooms, I'm generalizing here, but you're also going to have a staff that does not live in multiple neighborhoods. And so they are affected by that. And so I think this conversation could be about arts funding. It could be about, economic development. It could be, no matter what it is, media, segregation permeates everything that we do in this region. And so the press is going to be affected by that, and they're going to reflect those values as well. Now, the good thing that I think has happened is that we're no longer just living, the hegemonic forces of just 3 television stations and 2 newspapers. There's a whole lot more to consume, whether it's your community weekly or monthly newspaper to online resources, magazine, independent press. There's a lot more to choose from. I'm not even talking nationally, just in Chicago. So you can get your news from multiple sources and understand communities better than maybe you could even 20 years ago.
One of the things I think too that's important, along with the issue of news coverage and who delivers the news and who writes about things, is an age factor. I think that, no disrespect, but all the people in this room have gray hair, right? So, but I think that, part of what we
hair, right?
those who have hair, right?
That's right.
But obviously, I think part of what has to be part of the solution overall, whether it's Southside or West Side, is to include our youth in the things that we're trying to do and get them motivated to become part of this in terms of telling the story and become part of these community activism that you're talking about to change things.
But I think they are. The example that I
More.
give, I think it's, if we look at police reform in this city, that's squarely, I think, on young people. And I think it's harder to march for economic development than it is for police. Like Laquan McDonald, there was a video. And there have been questions, why didn't Chicago uprise like Ferguson or Baltimore? There was an infrastructure here. There was activism in place. And we saw before our own eyes the mayor say Jason Van Dyke is one bad apple. Gary McCarthy is great. After the Michigan Avenue shut down, he said there's systemic problems in the police department, and Gary McCarthy has got to go. And and that organizing, it's been on the West Side, it's been on the South Side. Those young people, and so I don't know. I'm not an organizer. I'm not an activist. But I don't know. I think it's harder. It appears to be harder to march or change some of the things that we are talking about because it's tangible because we live it, but it's not an incident the way police brutality is that you can rally around. So we don't see any young people in this room, but they absolutely deserve the utmost credit for the reform
They do.
that has
part of
happened
that, though, I think
in
is
this city.
what's needed is a joint, as you mentioned Michigan Avenue being shut down, part of what's needed is a joint effort. It was interesting during the shutdown of Michigan Avenue, you had a group of people over here with Reverend Jesse Jackson and Danny Davis over here, and Black Lives Matter people over here, and they weren't talking to each other. The Black Lives Matter people said, we shall overcome. I ain't hearing that right now, you know what I mean? So there does need to be some connecting of efforts to go to the next, whatever the next level is.
You know what? One of my pet peeves is when we do see positive coverage, and, from a West Sider's perspective, it's usually Southsiders speaking for West Siders, and that irks me to no end.
Why do you think that is?
Why do
Can you give an example?
Oh, for example, when we talk about development, community development, I believe the Urban League had some initiative where they were trying to bring about development.
Is that that 10-year plan?
Yes, the 10-year plan. But when they spoke about the West Side, they used Southsiders to actually tell our narrative. And I'm like, wait a minute, we got accomplished folks on the West Side who have forgotten more, forgive me, than the person from the Urban League knows about the West Side. So we need to, right? But we need to make sure. Excuse me, Harold. Well, we need to make sure that we have our own spokespeople who can tell our stories. And to the Tribune's credit, I think I even wrote a letter complaining to the Tribune about this lack of coverage and positive coverage in North Lawndale. So to their credit, Darlene Glanton did reach out to me, and she says, well, Valerie, what are the positive stories? Who should I talk to?
She's a black reporter, very competent.
Yes, she is. So if we make our complaints known, I do think people respond.
One of the things we discussed when we had a conference call with this panel to talk about what we were going to talk about, and one of the things we talked about is the fact that a lot of the institutions that people gravitate to are on the south side of Chicago, and which is one of the reasons why the West Side has not gotten the kind of like the Chicago Defender, a South Side institution, the DeSalvo Museum, and all the other things that are South Side institutions that black folks know about. And I think probably that might be one of the reasons why you don't have as much said about things that are happening over the years that are happening on the West Side. A lot of the institutions, Ebony Magazine, Jet Ebony, all of that's South Side stuff.
And we as activists need to be more savvy, I think.
So at this point, for those who have something to say, and there are a few, now would be the time. Are those microphones that are those working? Those microphones that were up here? Hello, lady with the telephone. The microphones for people out there, are they working? All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have some comments from our audience. People who have some things to say, please do not attack each other. We'd appreciate no fistfights tonight. Okay. So, there's one hand up back there. Oh. Yeah. From a microphone? Okay.
One's up there, so you might have to repeat the question even though we don't.
So, okay.
Harold Lucas, Black and Conference Commission, Tourism Council. Know a little bit about these struggles over the last 40 years.
Harold, do me a favor, would you? Step up to the front here and use this so you can be on camera and microphone at the same time.
Again, my name is Harold Lucas.
You have to use, yes. Is that right? Mr. Payne? That was okay? Or
Now,
listen, okay.
I have a very upper middle class.
Use this microphone.
I have a very upper middle class African American woman who was on my board of directors, who's about 70 now. She lives out in, she lives on 89th and Parnell. And very clearly, the plan for transformation, she told me personally, has destroyed the black middle class on the south side of Chicago. Right? The plan to incorporate, she lives next door to her, she has Section 8 tenants. You go in her house, she's got white carpet, portraits on the wall. I met this woman 30 years ago. Her and her mother were docents for the city, and they wore fashion gloves. That's how sophisticated they were. She's still on my board today. Class stratification within the race, and I take a proletariat position, a bottom-up position that Obama ran on in 2008, that you didn't hear anything about it after he got elected, right? So when the real estate becomes more valuable than the human beings who live on it, you get gentrification, right? Spatial deconcentration, 1940, Anthony Downs, the plan to remove 3 out of 4 blacks to make it safe for whites to re-inhabit inner cities across America. Only because of the fights in communities like Brownsville are we still around, and those blacks who did not take a class position on their own race and separate themselves based on trying to make the cut to be with the white folks when the gentrification comes. I'm gonna close with this. 2 years ago, I went to the first meeting of the World Business Chicago at Burke Grammar School. Last weekend, I went back to the Washington Park Summer meeting in that same school. When I went in 2 years ago, I walked in from the bus stop, and there was snow on the ground. I was the only footbridge coming in from the front of the building. When I got in the building, the room was filled with 100 white people who had drove in. That's the University of Chicago laying in, and the Southeast Chicago Commission, and Quad Community Development Corporation, and all those carpetbaggers who are not from Chicago, who are now in a leadership role on the South Side, right? Carrying the agenda of the University of Chicago to remove low and moderate income people. And they don't care who you are or what you got, right? Bottom line, do a Google search on 5317 South Prairie Avenue. What you're gonna find is a restored brownstone and a connection of 5 houses. To the south of there to 55th Street, there's nothing but a vacant lot. All the way to 51st Street, there's 2 houses, there's always a vacant lot. All the way to the vacant lot, to 51st Street, right? It's on the market for $570,000. So to your point, young lady, Natalie, if you say it ain't no justification, you must have on sunglasses like Ray Charles, because it's blatant at this point in terms of the removal of the proletariat class. 662 East 38th Place, Ivy Wells, came up on welfare, no criminal record, I ain't never stuck nobody, never shot nobody, right? But you still get blocked in terms of doing civic engagement to truly empower the disadvantaged because they don't respect the African American community because our own leadership has sold us out time and time again.
Thank you.
My name is Harold L. Lucas. I'm president and CEO of the Black Metropolis Convention and Tourism Council, a 501c3 destination marketing organization for not only Brownsville, but the South and Southwest side region of Chicago within the Millennium Reserve Initiative. We see the infrastructure. We see Michael Reese Hospital. We see the Presidential Library. We see the houses in South Chicago. We know we're on the most valuable land in the Midwest region of the country. And we know that they try to push us out with no respect for our authentic cultural experience.
Yes. Blow them all out. Amazon.com. And extortion.
Okay, so I will say this. I used to really get upset when people would talk about African Americans who moved out of the neighborhood. As Harold Lucas was saying, people would say, well, you know what? I want to live next door to white people. And I always had a problem with that. I used to live at 3221 South Calumet. Went to Douglas School, which is right across the street from where I live. This was in the 50s. My father worked at the post office. My mother worked in the school system as a clerk. And we lived in a basement apartment with quite a few rodents and other things that were running around. But what they did was they saved their money and they wanted to move to a better location with a better school and a neighborhood that provided a lot of things that we didn't have. My parents didn't save their money and make that move because they wanted to live next door to white people. They saved their money and made that move because they wanted my brother and I to go to a better school, to have more options about things that were available to other people. And they worked very hard for that. My father worked 2 jobs. So when people would say that to me about, well, they just did that because they wanted to live next door to white people, I used to get really upset about that. They worked that hard for that reason? I don't think so. It's just a matter of trying to get the next best thing for the family. At that point, that's what they did. Somebody had their hand up back. Yeah. Come up here so we can hear you. And by the way, panel, if you have any comments about what was said, feel free right after this comment. Oh, this is the presentation.
No, I just took notes on it.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Ryan. I'm from the west side of Chicago, often confused to be a Southsider, though, because I guess how I talk or whatever. But you just. I don't agree with the notion. But to kind of play into the ideal of like the politics of like behavior based on where you're from. That's real. But I'm not here to talk about the South Side on that level. I want to kind of connect the question that's like, how do we have economic development without gentrification? That's a real question that we need to dive into. Yes. I don't agree entirely that it's a race issue and not an economic issue or a class issue. I think that you can't have a class discussion without a race discussion, and the opposite is very true as well. I mean, it's absolutely true that richer black people still live in lesser situations, lesser quality situations. We're talking about people who have college degrees that are white earn 11 times the amount of a black college person that holds a college degree. Black workers tend to work longer and make less money. And then to your point about better schools, that kind of like goes along with the situation that is there's more income in the pockets of white families, and those the money's being facilitated, towards the quality of the school that's in that area. Then obviously, yeah, if you have the wealth to black flight out of your neighborhood that doesn't have you don't share that same wealth as the people around you who live in that same neighborhood, that's where you would go. I think that that's common sense, that your family was to move, but also an underlining issue of the problem with our system, which I think people said, and I think Malcolm X said it the best, you can't have capitalism without racism. Just the entire notion is that this system that puts money in the pockets of the very few is going to rely on the necessity of racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, whatever system of oppression, because that's what it benefits off of. I know this is about West Side and South Side, but look at Cabrini Green, who's gone and now costs $3,500 a month to stay there. I used to be over there when I was a kid, remember going into the projects and being scared of what was in that area. Now you see small white women rotting with their dogs at 12 a.m. That's if you want to talk about gentrification in Chicago, that's a prime example.
And white
right
men
there.
smoking crack and buying sex slaves right next to the church.
Sure. We have to talk about my father was an alderman on the west side of Chicago in the 27th Ward. When he went against Daley, they paid $500,000 to get him the hell out of there. That's what they did. But
Stop acting with this man. Let him speak.
I mean, it's something to be said about the role of the Democratic Party. I was just tabling on the west side of Chicago and the south side of Chicago, and one of the things that they do have in common is that they feel like they've been left behind by the Democratic Party. That's something I think we can share throughout this city because the Democratic Party runs it. And I'm not saying that the Republicans are a better option. I'm saying that what we need to have is someone who is not tied to either one of these capitalist parties, that's not tied to the Democrats who run the city.
The Democrats are the Republicans.
You got the Democrats. And then if we were to get somebody in who does not have the ability to change what around them, they need to use their bully pit in their position to raise it up to say, this person or this group is not allowing me to fight for the people in this city. When my father went against Mayor Daley and went to the presidential towers and said, dump Daley, the response was all the black Democrats, all the Democrats said, they stayed away from him.
Plantation
That's what we're talking about. But what my father didn't have is he didn't have movements of people behind him. That's who he should have been relied on. That's why I learned from the politics from him, even though I was only 6 or 7 or 8. I don't really remember the year. I think 7. And over the course of time, I used to ask them, wait, your party was the Democratic Party? And they went against you, supposedly the party of working people? I learned from that. I moved to the left of my father.
I mean,
Economic segregation is more than legalized, is worse than it was than legalized segregation 60 years ago, according to the Atlantic. Okay. The new study finds that in Chicago, billions of income, tens of thousands of college degrees, and hundreds of lives each year are stagnated due to the Chicago segregation.
yeah.
There is a system that's in place that benefits by keeping white Chicagoans, black Chicagoans, Latino Chicagoans away from each other. And that we need to build, if we really want to change the situation that is the west and south side of Chicago, and all of Chicago, and all of this nation, if not this world. And I think the world is in context right now that the current president dropped the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan.
Look, respect to you, brother. Respect.
Please.
No.
But let me just say that part of it is giving people room to talk and to listen. I mean, that helps solve some of these problems. And again, I don't want to jump on the moderator's path here, but okay, but just all right.
I was just saying that it just needs to be an international struggle. That's all.
All right.
One of the reasons he ran, he was a Democrat, but
He
was one that, his father was a precinct captain and got dumped by Daley. That's one of the reasons he was always a little different in terms of the direction he took. Because the same thing happened to his father. It wasn't alderman, but his father was a precinct captain, got that dogged out by the system. And Harold always remembered that and always had a thing about that, about how they did his dad. You know?
happened with Metcalf, and happened with Louis H. Caldwell too.
So, yeah.
So you history.
Can I speak from here?
Well, you can, but we're trying to tape everything. So,
Mine is quick.
well, you can make it quick up here. Just because you're real, you don't have to be long.
People get stuck here.
Yeah, I know they get stuck.
And we enjoyed it because we talk down, we want to have a dialogue rather than a monologue.
Who are you?
My name is David Pendleton. I was one of those youngsters out there in 1983 when Harold Washington was running for mayor.
Speak up, please.
And what I find is we are right back where we were.
Yes.
We right now, baby boomers, have the millennials that we need to reach out to. That's where our problem is. We're not really connecting with the millennials.
That's where the solution
They
is,
are
too.
just as large a voting bloc as we are. My question, is there any involvement in the millennials in any of your projects? Are they making themselves known in their groups and in their formations in some of the work that you do? That's all.
So, yeah, so, as in the case of the young man that just spoke, do you have people like that who are involved with your efforts?
With our clients, yeah. The answer is yes. A couple clients on the west side who are doing economic development and youth development, yes, we have involved the millennials.
So, I saw somebody else's hand up. Okay.
I want to say that.
Well, you have to stay from up here because they're trying to tape this, and the only way you can get on being taped is being up here.
I
Okay.
just want to speak, please. I want to say that I find that all the organizations, they're very ageist, and they have conferences about the children, and they don't involve the children. They're not even on the panels. And then that's why you see this divide going on in the social activism community. The elders are too busy talking about the kids, and while they're talking about it, the kids are getting it in, they're getting it done. Rather than having, it needs to be an intergenerational activist struggle, and the elders, if they have any issues, they need to teach the children like they should have did their African history that they blame them for not knowing, and they didn't, on how to do things better, but also the elders need to listen, because I find both of them to be deaf, the elders as well as the children, and the children can teach them something if they're humble and teachable like God tells you to do. Now also, concerning Whole Foods, if you looked at the Food Desert Report on WFLD, they said that they were not coming to Inglewood. But magically, once they got our TIF money and raped us for that, then they're in, Whole Check is now in Inglewood. And also, I wanted to say that I love Chicago Public Radio, and I'm a big fan of it. They did the White Flight insurance report, and I have not yet heard anybody on WBON or anybody, because I tried to get information to them and it just didn't happen, on their side, but also the community demanding that, because I know they had a follow-up report to it, because I did send some stuff out to get that stopped. But here's the thing. They're using it for something else now, but where is the community demand that we get the money as well as the interest on that money that they have been having through White Flight Insurance?
Let me ask you a question, very briefly. You might address this if you care to. One of the things about, one of the things mentioned was about the collaboration between the older generation and the younger generation. What do you think about, during Obama's administration, we had a big conference at the White House, and we invited people from Black Lives Matter, and I think one or two came, but the majority, one of the major spokespersons said he didn't want to be co-opted. He wasn't going for that, and he wasn't going there to have that conversation. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, you do wish that there could be a great. It's time not necessarily to collaborate, but to pass the baton. To say, look, here's how you register voters. This is what we did in '72. Here's how you do this. Here's what we did in '82. It's yours, baby. Peace. We're out. That's what needs to happen. You know, okay, so I'll be 52 in October. So I was thinking, I wrote a story for the Sun Times before architecture. So this must have been 25 years ago. That talked about how the same people who were in charge of the civil rights mechanism when I was that age were the same ones who were in charge of it when I was born. And now 25 more years has passed, and it's almost the same. So I think that there needs to be not just a collaboration, literally a passing of the baton. My generation X largely missed it, but now I mean that's what has to happen. I think the activism. You talked about the Black Lives Matter protests on Michigan Avenue. If I were king of the world, what would happen is that the established civil rights mechanism would have taught those guys, would have said, look, we're going to set up a voter registration table so that when you do your thing, you come over here and register to vote. That way you can flex you can flex another muscle come election day. And that's just not happening. People are holding on too long. Exactly.
We need both. We need the elders, the wisdom of
But the elders are dying off. I mean, look, I'm 52.
I'm
right?
in agreement, but we also need the
So it's time to
training
pass.
programs.
I'm just saying respectfully, in this, with the idea that a baton is being passed.
I'm in
right?
agreement. There needs
All
to be internship, but also we also need to be collaborative because we need the wisdom of the elders as well as the youth. We need both wisdoms in order to survive and prosper and get through this next genocide.
I think the part of the thing that we're missing here is that millennials don't really identify with the Democratic or the Republican Party. So they somewhere in the middle. And if they won't come together, they not gonna come together with the Democrats, they not come together with the Republicans, and they feel like to hell with everybody else, they not gonna start their own party in the middle. So I think the major thing that's gonna happen, if they don't wanna step up and take the roles, then the people who were the Xers or the Yers, as they say, those are the people in the middle who really are the ones who carry in the next generation. Because technically, the people who shut down Michigan Avenue was not just Black Lives Matter. It was other groups out there. And Black Lives Matter is kind of shifting now. They're not just doing black things anymore. They align themselves with the gays, with the lesbians, and all those different other communities. But the one thing that we missing as a people is that black people don't organize anymore. We don't get out here on the front lines and fight. I work in my daughter's school. I'm the president of the LSC at that school. And when the schools was closing, I was out there. But it wasn't a lot of black people out there on the front lines with us making demands of the administration, of the mayor, of anybody. So, I mean, if we want to shift the way things working in our communities, I work in my neighborhood. I'm on several different committees in my neighborhood. But black people don't come out.
Let me ask you
want to
this.
complain.
Do you have any, are you West Side?
I live in North Lawndale.
Okay, so do you have any connection with anybody on the South Side who has some of the same interests? One of the things we want to talk about a little bit is to try to coalesce some effort, because what's happening now is, and I don't want to turn this into a political statement, but what's going to happen in the next mayoral election is that these same people that we're talking about now, as you pointed out, who are Democrats and they're not independents, they're kind of adrift as it relates to politics. Those people that are of voting age are going to be very important in whatever this next election is. And when people are talking about, well, there needs to be a change, well, if people are not participating.
That's true,
in
but
the
I talk
process,
to people
there
on the
won't be
South
any change.
Side, and everybody keeps saying, oh, we need a new breed of leadership. But don't nobody want to put themselves out there on the front line, and that's on the South Side as well as the West Side. When I go to news conferences or press releases and I see Jesse Jackson still at these conferences speaking up for black people, I'm saying, what is going on in society? Everything everywhere is broke down. Everything is. But people don't want to put themselves out there on the front line. And that's on the South Side too. People talk about it, but who want to be about it? And that's the thing. And one thing you got to realize too is that when people get in their neighborhoods and they start working in their neighborhoods, they concerned with their neighborhood. I mean, when there's people on the South Side, when they do news conference, when they have their town hall meetings, they don't call us on the West Side and say, hey, you want to come? I go on the South Side for events too. If the Black Caucus is over there, I'm at Chicago State for that. What's happening? People don't want to come together. And that's the bottom line. If we don't want to organize, if we don't want to get out here in the field, ain't nothing going to happen. We can talk to them, blue in the face. And there needs to be freedom schools as well as voter education, not just voter registration.
So,
no slaves for the system.
So in dealing with this question about coalescing efforts. Is that a reality at all in terms of Southside and Westside? Because there are two major elections coming up. I don't want to make this political necessarily, but there's a gubernatorial election coming up in 2018 and a mayoral election coming up in 2019. And the reality of there not being any connective tissue between the South Side and the West Side in terms of African Americans, that's going to become a major issue.
Please don't leave out the congressional next year,
Right, exactly.
which is weak.
Any thoughts?
You know, I think one of the common threads was school closings. I never had seen so much coalescing around a single issue across town until ROM closed all those schools, South Side, West Side. So I would attend press conferences and you would have people from both sides of town. And I think had we kept that momentum, we probably would be in a better position politically. I think another raw nerve was police brutality. I think there's a great opportunity there, but it also seems like some of the folks who are at the forefront of that movement, somehow they've been co-opted or silenced. You know, I don't feel the same, well, no, I'm just saying I don't feel the same intensity. Okay, well, thank you for correcting me, but I just know I don't feel the same intensity from that movement that I felt, say, before Kim Foxx was elected. Mm-hmm.
I think the momentum shift, but it's still people out there who trying to go that way. But
Holman Square, the Guardian newspaper.
yeah, but it's not on the forefront like it used to be. I mean,
I went to the police accountability hearings on both the South Side and the West Side, and you're right, it was great response to that, and people came together, and out of that, and I was kind of critical of the formation of that board, but after talking to the lady who was in charge of that, I found that
she's brilliant.
They came out with some great ideas and asked for a consent decree, the city agreed, but now this administration is not going to honor it. This attorney general is not going to, that's not going to happen.
Of course.
So what has to
Well,
happen?
that's different from what I'm talking about. You talking about the Department of Justice report,
Right.
but you know the mayor created another police accountability board where with Emperor, is it called Emperor? Copper. It's called Copper. So I think when the mayor created that, the people who was pushing for elected police accountability board, they lost momentum. So I don't know what they doing now. I think they kind of on Kim Foxx to see if she can help them pull stuff together. But I mean, the thing is if we want results, if we really, like you said, the South Side, the West Side, we all separate sides. It's 77 neighborhoods in Chicago, and each one of those neighborhoods got their own things that they want to work on. So if we don't have issues around the city, like when election time comes, if we can't pull all these people together, we might get another Governor Rauner again. We might get Ron back in office again.
God forbid.
Let me ask you whether or not there are a lot of people who have had nothing to say tonight, so we'd like to include some other people in the conversation. If you have something that you'd like to share with us, or an idea, different thought, whatever. And
I'm just very curious about this whole political process of how we became the city where aldermen decide, have their fiefdom rather than looking at, we're a city as a whole, and what's good on the south side could be good on the west side, it can be good on the north side, that economic development, wherever it is, investing in people, and how did this system come about that you can't do anything and then you get run down as an alder person if you can't play with, if Daley or Ron is not happy with you.
Just a theory, right, from a guy who went to vocational high school. Chicago Vocational High School, class of 83, by the way. Let me just say that. Is that, some of this goes back to Anton Sturmack, right? Where so you have a city that before Sturmack, North Side WASPs ruled it, right? Sturmack comes in, he understands that there are new ethnics coming in by the day. So he figures out a way to give every tribe his little piece, which is how you get the patronage system. Every tribe gets a little piece of the action. He wrests power from the north side and puts it and puts it on the south side. The downside of that of which there are many, is that it fosters this kind of provincialism, right? Where it's my ward, it's my people, it's my tribe, and you don't see the city becomes balkanized. Let the Southern migrants come up, escaping the boot from the Jim Crow South, black Southern migrants, and it just exacerbates it. But, you know, as I said earlier, the city is run like a small town. Previous to this mayor, I was part of a kind of like not a secret commission, but sort of like a group of people who were talking about what needs to happen to make the city really a 21st century city. And I said, it's the thing that you guys won't consider, and it's governance. It can't be governed this way anymore. Progressive city can't be governed this way anymore because, or it'll perish. And that's where I am, where we are now. Somehow, whether it's the youth and Black Lives Matter, the youth in the city, wherever it's from, I'd like to see a coalition, frankly, between South and West Sides, because as we've talked about in a conversation leading up to this phone conversation, all the stuff we talked about today, all the disparity, who benefits from that? It isn't the Southsiders, it isn't the West Siders, and exactly. So it's time to break it. I'm looking for candidates to do it. But that, to me, one theory is how we got there.
Here's something interesting too. This is a flashback. Keep flashing back to Harold Washington. But one of the things that he did when he became mayor is when it was a 29-21 and he did not have control of the city council. One of the things he did was he was trying to get an ordinance through that had to do with street repair, 10 miles of streets in your ward. Well, the white aldermen in wards that were primarily white, not a problem, but they didn't want that necessarily to happen with other wards. And so what he did was he loaded a bunch of newspaper people on a bus, and he went around to different neighborhoods to tell people that, you know, like, you need your streets repaired in this neighborhood too. And so there was a consensus among all the wards that we need to pass this thing so all the wards can get this 10 miles of street repair. And I mean, that was creative on his part, something he did at that point. But it takes somebody who had an interest in the city as an overall thing and said, well, the way to get this done, he knew how to play the game. And in this instance, how he played the game was to do that sort of theatrical thing, but it worked, and he got it done. Any other thoughts? Yeah, in the back.
Alternative party. My name is Leslie Page, background formerly of the County Planning and Development.
And you're going to have to, because we can hardly hear you.
Okay, I'm Leslie Page Piper, formerly of the County Planning and Development, and from 1647 in Black Tech Mecca. So I've been involved in community development, even went here to school as a monk. And I just want to say some quick things. That is that I believe that, first I've been in Chicago all my life, 58 years. I don't see any different in the South and West Side. My housemate is from the West Side. My doctor's from the West Side. I've been in the same house in Chatham all my life. But I think that we need to, as South and West Sides, realize that we need to develop an independent bloc that can fund itself, and then decide if we want to run in terms of politics. That's the only way around this. But we have to find a way to fund it and to find people that we can trust to do that. The other thing I want to say is that there should be a basic premise, a logical premise of living as human beings, that in every part of any city, there are people that are innovative and creative and have a lot of brilliance. And therefore, we should reach out to every part of the city and therefore make sure we have parity in every part of the city in terms of making sure people have equitable educational resources, economic investment, and all, because it does not help us to operate at our optimal if we're shutting out one section. Now, I don't know who's brave enough to get beyond it. Let's get beyond a racist framework. But that's only the only way. Even in this country, there's a Jim Coughlin out of Gallup, and he's collaborating with organizations in Atlanta. And they're saying, you know, we have to get beyond this stuff. In order to be a better country, to be a better city, we have to look at every section being one where we can pull a cream of crop and pull everyone else up to make it a better place.
Rather than
get beyond that. We're hurting ourselves if we don't. Because we don't know what child sitting in a project can come up with the next disease-preventing antidote or whatever the case may be. You know, it's just logical. We need to begin to feel people and find people who think that way and operate in that premise.
I'm going to agree. But the governmental chairs are too busy assassinating them.
I'd like to get a statement from each of our panelists, and we're going to wrap up, and Natalie's going to do a book signing.
Yes, I'll be in
For
the
her
back.
book from Southside, she's going to
Yes.
be in the back there. Okay, that's cool. And we'll have a little time for some conversation that we didn't have while this was going on, because I know people have things that, yeah, I wanted to say that, but I didn't want to say that in front of everybody. Right? So maybe we can say that after we conclude this, because we do want to, I guess, foster the idea that, you know, South Side, West Side, and some of the myths and some of the realities that have existed with that are things that we need to really take a look at, especially if you're African American and you're affected by all the things we talked about, whether it's housing or whether it's education, or just everything that has to do with, you know, living a decent life, affecting both sides of town. So, as you wrap it up, Natalie?
A lot to think about this evening. I would like to end on the note that I don't think apathy is an issue. No one has used that word, but I think that it's worth pointing out. There's a palpable anger that I feel from people in this city. And I think it's been decades in the making. And I think some issues are coming to a head right now. And Lee said this, I've said it, you know, the strength and the weakness, the vastness, and how you can get very territorial. But the positive of that is that there are like hyper-local issues in people's communities that they can work on. And then I think the question, I think that people still want a leader or a politician to look for, and they don't have that. The passion is there, the issues are laid out, they have a vision, but who can execute it? And I think that's the problem. It's not knowing what you want your community to be or to look like. And I think that's really important to remember, because I think we get really beat down hearing the negatives about our communities and our narratives, and that's not true. And because of my job, I get to talk to a lot of people, and I mean, there's a lot of anger and frustration, and probably even more so now that we have a different, you know, we have somebody else in the White House. So people are looking for ways to channel that, and even white people. Yeah, I know we're talking about West and South Side, but I'm hearing like, what can I do? And I always say, what issue, like there's a school or a housing issue in your neighborhood that you can, you know, connect to. But also to end on the note of, you know, bridging gaps, I probably need to do a better job in my personal life about, you know, thinking even recreationally. So one thing that I tell people, and this is what I do in my own life, how we can start breaking down some of these barriers without thinking about the high-level policy issues. And when I talked about Chicago being diverse yet segregated, what those opportunities mean, it means that I think that food and culture and theater, you know, Lisa Lee talks about these not being the extras of a city, but the things that make a city. So we do something called Explore Different Chicago Neighborhood. I know you know this story. I talked about my daughter bringing her to Pullman, and she's like, "Oh, this is where the old white people live, like grandma." She went to an estate sale and just like wrapped up in all these houses getting stuff. But that was my way of showing her, and we do this. Like the girls had Ethiopian food in Edgewater, and I thought they weren't gonna like it. They loved it, and I just thought here, I was like, we haven't done a West Side trip. And so on my own life, I need to think about, okay, like, what haven't they seen on the West Side? And so they're just really small things. If we look at the segregation in our own lives and building bridges, Emile Cambry in the book from Blue 1647 said, Chicago has, and I think this kind of gets to, this could be relevant to what you were talking about, Chicago has sister cities around the planet. Why don't we do sister neighborhoods within the city? And one church that I spoke to, after I mentioned as a suggestion, I forgot what neighborhood they're gonna do. This was in Irving Park, and they said, we love that idea, and we're going to find a neighborhood to partner with. So, you know, it could be, it doesn't have to be on a political issue, it could just be on a, you know what, let's do a joint block club. Like, let's just start building bridges that way. So I think that they're tiny things, these things seem so intractable. but there are daily things in our lives that we can think about as far as building bridges.
Valerie?
I think Natalie brought up some really, really good points as she was talking about us looking for, quote unquote, that leader. That leader is us. You know, we have a Messiah complex, and I'll say I have a Savior complex. You know, I can't do this work. I've tried to do a lot myself or in a small group. I think we need to stop looking at folks outside of ourselves, and folks like me need to build better and stronger coalitions. You know, I'm fortunate to know people, you know, all around the city, but I don't think that, you know, I personally have done a good job of developing anything that's sustainable across different communities. We tend to be in crisis mode, you know, like when the schools were closing, a school turnaround, you know, I was all over the city, North Side, South Side, West Side, you know, just talking about the different issues. And, you know, we had folks from North Side, South Side here in North Lawndale, but after the crisis was over, we had no infrastructure to keep people engaged. I would say that the strongest organization that has been able to keep folks engaged that I know of, you know, it might be others, is Raise Your Hand. And they focus on education. They've been able to engage about 6,000 or 7,000 folks now. I think one of their first issues was the longer school day. You know, it was just a handful of parents, you know, a few years ago, and now they've got over 6,000 parents and families engaged in that work. They're a bona fide 501c3 organization with the board and all that good stuff. So I think we need to start developing infrastructure. And me, I'm scared of commitment. So I've been burned so many times. So I know how to start organizations. That's one of the things I do as a living. But I also know, you know, one of the scary things about knowing all the legalities involved and the commitment that's involved, that holds me back. You know, I haven't found a group of people that I believe have the same values that would keep us together long term. And I think another thing you mentioned was, you know, vision. You kind of talked about that. If we don't have vision, and I've never heard of a collective vision, and we usually tend to go to Operation Push on Saturday to get our orders from on high, you know, that's not necessary. You know, vision comes from the people, right? And we need to be self-confident, self-determined in order to do that. It doesn't take rocket science. You know, you don't need a master's degree to have vision. So I think we need to have a collective vision, and I think there are enough common issues and heartaches in the city of Chicago to unite us. You know, as Audrey was saying from the floor, we just don't have those people to come together who are willing to be on the front lines, because it's not easy being on the front lines. You know, nobody likes to get blown up over and over and over again. You know, it takes a special kind of foolish person to continue to take a licking and keep ticking. You know, so those are my issues.
Jesse Jackson and I are about the same age, so I can relate to in his time. But the press always go. That's where the press goes for comment. You know, and I look at that sometimes. I have the same feeling. I say, well, you need to move on. You know what I mean? Nothing against Jesse. He did what he did during his time, and he represents an era, and he was a brilliant mover and shaker in his time. But I think it's also a responsibility of his to say, don't talk to me, talk to this 36-year-old who's got it going on and has something to say that's meaningful. And he has to make that commitment. One of the things about I want to categorize all black leadership, it's hard to let go. Harold Washington didn't want to let go. I mean, there were meetings about what to do if something happened to him. And I know specifically about a meeting, Lee, there was a restaurant on 21st Street, Catfish Digby's.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
And they had a meeting. I talked to Bill Digby. He said the meeting was at his place, upstairs, where they have a meeting room. And the meeting was among some people who were saying, now what we need to do in case something happens to Harold, because we want to have a continuum of the leadership. Harold heard about it, because he wasn't told about it, and he went berserk.
Oh,
He
my
called them
God.
all traitors. You know, they were trying to make some provisions for the next whatever, as other people did in their political groups. And so that thing about letting it go, very, very difficult for leadership.
That's a good point. And let me just say, one of the things that we forget about Chicago, that's in Chicago's DNA, is that Chicago is a frontier town, right? It founded that way, right. And although the nation spread further west, that frontier is still in our DNA. And what does that mean? It means the guy who can make the best deal, the guy who can talk the loudest, the guy who can punch the hardest, or the person, I shouldn't say the guy, gets stuff done. Either good or bad. So what I'm saying is, as we're trying to figure out what power, how do you address power in this town? Power respects power and nothing else. And one of the things, when we talk about Harold Washington, we remember it wrong. We're told it wrong, we're taught it wrong, same with Martin Luther King. It's taught like it's this great parting of the clouds, and the Lord reached down and he said, "You're the one," and then he comes up, and all of a sudden we have a king. And we totally forget that there was a political and financial infrastructure that put Washington in office. So as we forget that we were looking for the savior, but we forget that we saved ourselves, progressives. We decided through advertising and remember Come Alive October 5, this sort of radio campaign that registered people to vote. That's what got things done, and that's the only thing that this town respects. So I think we're at a moment in this city where city's population is falling in many areas, is growing in the central area, but it's falling in other places. You have a mayor who needs for something to happen outside of downtown. And I think that we need a leadership in these communities that can understand that this potentially, having the mayor by the, I can't think of the word, by the collar, right? Can potentially be a thing that you can use to your advantage. That a politician needs a win like a crackhead needs a hit, right? and so to be able to negotiate this thing and say, look, here's what you need, and to be able to have the power to, and here's what we know. We all know in these communities what we want. Pullman knows what it wants. North Lawndale knows what it wants. We all know what we want. The idea is to develop a power and the mechanism to push it and make it happen. And I think we're as bad as things can be in this town. I think that we're at a time though. If we play it right, some things can happen.
That's what the Southside and the Westside need to coalesce.
Exactly.
Because if you can, as you pointed out, I think in one of your questions is about who benefits. Well, if you can keep that separation, that benefits the powers that be.
That's right. Because the absence of that means the South Side and West Side continue to empty out, and others begin to move in. And if that's what's wanted, then that's what's wanted. But if that's not what's wanted, to have equitable communities where you can stay, where grandmama can grow old and be there safely, where you can go to college and come back and live affordably, as opposed to spend up all your money in the more expensive places. If that's what you want, work for it, and then obviously, and understand that City Hall only respects a fist, a bigger fist, metaphorically speaking, and that's how we got to organize and push our way through.
Amara, I hope you were tweeting. I wish that you could have been up here with us talking.
She's supposed to be sending me notes.
I asked her to do that in the beginning.
Yeah, we would have read your statement for you.
Well, I'm sure this is not the last time we'll have a group of people getting together to talk about some of the situations. The last time, Amara, when we had a panel that you were on, it was incredible. So I want people to know what a great contribution you make to the whole concept. So thanks to our panel, Valerie Leonard, Natalie Moore, Lee Bay, and Amara Enyia. Give them a big round of applause. So what we're going to do now is social, and Natalie's going to sign a book called The Southside in the back. And
jump up and
he's got the good microphone.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what happened.
Now they're going to be right up here signing books. As Richard said, we have a whole lot of other projects coming up about the West Side Chicago. Our next is on June 15th with Tracy Hall and Rod Joy all about art by West Side Chicago. So come back on June 15th at 6 o'clock to hear the parties as well. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.